Mr. McAleese, thanks very much for the invitation and also putting in a good word to the Secretary of the Navy and the CNO, who really have made supply chains and sustainment a priority for sure. It's much different, in my view, than it has been viewed in the past. So it's great to be here. We've got a few minutes, we've got 15 minutes. I'm gonna try and leave some time for questions if you have any, but it's great to be able to be here and talk with you a little bit about our Navy supply chains and some of the challenges that we have out there, the opportunities that we have, and how we can use your help to really get better. I think we only have 4 slides that might be up, and I learned some of these pictures. Anybody have the slides there? Well, anywho, as they come up, I learned this while I was on the Joint Staff. It's called Big Hand, Little Chart. Oh, look, there it is. Big Hand, Little Chart from my Army friends out there. But look, this is a really simple depiction of a Navy's end-to-end supply chain, right? And when you think about an operational commander who operates forward, one of the most enduring problems, military problems obviously, is to prepare your forces, to prepare your units. For the Navy, that's really complicated with that force generation, the maintenance availabilities, the modernizations that you go through, which takes time, the basic training, the intermediate advanced training, and then to deploy all the way across the globe, oftentimes to very remote parts of the world, oftentimes isolated at sea, and to be able to sustain yourself. That's a real huge challenge. It always has been. Now the good news is on the left side of that, where you see that tactical edge, where you see that aircraft carrier and these ships that operate out there, which, oh, by the way, are operating more distributed today, perhaps, than they have in the recent past, which makes it even more challenging and exciting for us. But we're good at logistics. All the way from the U.S. Transportation Command down through its components to include the Military Sea Lift Command, Combat Logistics Forces, replenishment at sea, we're really good at that. But the environment is getting way more complex, right? Contested environments. Our information exchanges may be disrupted. We may have protected information exchanges at sea with our ships that we operate with, but once those information exchanges get back and then spread out through a vast defense industrial base, there's vulnerabilities that are out there. So the environment has changed. But if you move away to across the spectrum here, get out to the defense industrial base, get out to the wholesale supply systems that really had charged with sustaining those ships. And sustaining, mind you, a maximum level event, 6+ aircraft carriers, hundreds of ships at the same time. And by the way, it's not only US ships that we support, but we have plenty of allied and partners that are bought in, vested in, to our Navy's supply chain and our parts that are out there. So it's a big effort here and takes everybody. When I look at this, what I see is 2.5 million parts rotating back and forth along that continuum right there. From the defense industrial base through our wholesale activities all the way out to forward position sites into the storerooms on our ships and our submarines. And of course, there's a return chain that comes back because many of those parts, the most critical, most consequential ones, are really expensive. They're technologically advanced and they've got to be repaired. And so it's really complicated. I also see a bunch of silos there. And so part of our journey has been about understanding that operating environment. And Mr. McAleese, through your defense analysis, I will tell you this, it certainly does give us much greater insights into that environment than we've ever had before. One of the first steps of that joint operational planning process is to understand your environment. We do that well in the operational context, but we have a lot to learn within that defense acquisition realm there, reaching all the way back into the defense industrial base. So silos. There's a couple of points here. A couple of the big, but I'll just talk about the organic repair capability. So when you think about our organic repair capability, our shipyards, private shipyards, our 4 public shipyards, our fleet readiness centers, which are our depots for our aviation, really important. That part of the supply chain has to work extraordinarily effective and efficient. Well, here's what we found out. The FRCs, over the course of the past 10 years, the actual volume of their production has dropped by 70%. 70%. And that imposes costs on that ecosystem. Okay? We've got to do something about that. We have to reverse it. We noticed what was happening out there. And it's a similar situation in our repair facilities out there with our public shipyards. And you know the challenges that we have there in getting out our submarines. But those are just, a couple of examples. There's thousands of them that are out there. But again, the bottom line is, when I look across here, there was a lot of fragmented and uncoordinated operations, activities, and investments across this continuum. And that's what our journey has really been about, is to be able to understand those, dissect those, and then bring them together way more effectively than we ever had before. And most importantly, it's really bringing accountability into the space. So when you think about the Navy, operational commands, and you're all familiar with those, PAC Fleet, Fleet Forces Command, Naval Forces Europe, and all their subordinate Navy component commands. And when you think about the shore infrastructure, there's 15 shore commands. There's 5 systems commands. There's 6 type commanders that are out there in the administration command. All of that activity, whether it's out at the tactical edge operationally or upstream into our PEOs and our program offices, everybody is affecting everybody out there. And that's what this journey has been on. Let's go to the next slide really quickly. All this has, it's no doubt it has degraded our readiness for sure. It has not made us efficient. So what is this naval sustainment system supply? First, to fix our problems, the first thing we did was we looked outside the Navy. And we started to study business a little closer. We did some commercial benchmarking that was out there to understand how the leading industrial companies really think about design of their supply chain, how they manage them and operate them. So there was a lot to learn. We hadn't done that as good as we could have in the past. We looked at big companies that were similar to ours in the Navy, like Caterpillar, John Deere, Delta Airlines, for an example. Although they're not exactly like the military and like the Navy, they operate big capital investments in equipment. They put them in remote parts of the world and they have to sustain them. They have to modernize them, keep them going. But one of the key insights, that we learned out of all this is in these leading companies, supply chain is a top strategic priority and is elevated up to the C-suite. We had not done that in the Navy. Elevated supply chains up into the C-suite. And it's because these companies, your companies out there, recognize that supply chains that run effectively and efficiently contribute to your bottom line, right? Your performance, your cost, your profitability, your EBITDA, earnings before income tax, distortions and amortization. Wow, look at that. And many other things, right, that make your company successful that are out there. So we adapted lessons learned throughout this journey, and we started to not adopt them, but to adapt them to our military construct out there. And I tell you what, it's been a real good learning. So we've got a few pillars. This is just a strategic level construct that we've set up here. Where did it go? Went away. Strategic level construct that we have out there with a few pillars. And you look at this, one of the things that came out was the Navy is, I think they say, about the equivalent of a Fortune 11 company, right? $180 billion that are coming in. Our supply systems command that we operate is about a $40 billion business with $8 billion in annual revenue that comes in. And so we can't do this alone. And in these pillars, we actually have assigned support team commanders. So I serve as the support team commander, an accountable, responsible officer for the alignment end-to-end of our supply chains to make sure that they're running as best as they can, to be better, to be excellent. But in there I have, it's now I think up to 12 support team commanders, 6 of which are 3 stars. And I mention that to you because we can't do this alone. It takes everybody. It takes Admiral Weitzel, the air boss, down at the tactical edge with his squadrons. It takes Admiral Chebby up at the Naval Air Systems Command, Admiral Hornbuckle, all of this activity to be aligned with each other. Because levers that are being pulled down at the fleet or levers that are being pulled in the program offices are unknowingly, unwittingly having detrimental downstream effects, okay? Because we're if you will, fragmented, right? Siloed. And we're breaking down these barriers, and it's been an exciting time doing that. The other thing that's unique about this program that we have is we now have 4-star involvement in all matters pertaining to our supply chains. So on a monthly basis, we are held accountable in front of the 4 stars, and that can be uncomfortable at times, but it's great learning. And then we actually report out our operating progress that we're making on our program to be able to change our supply chain, make it run better, whether it's maritime, whether it's aviation, whether it's expeditionary. This is just very different from our approach to the past, but it's certainly, with having those 4 stars involved, it drives accountability without a doubt. And they encourage our learning, they encourage our self-assessment, our self-correcting, and most importantly, doing things that we're uncomfortable with doing. And you've heard this before, which is embracing the red, embracing problem areas, elevating barriers for resolution by our 4 stars and others that our organizations just can't get resolved by themselves. And so there's a lot of goodness that's happening. Now we can go to the next slide. We'll go to slide number 3 here. All right, I tell you what, this journey has been fantastic. And just over we're into year 3 now. And the numbers, the results speak for themselves. So if we look at this, I mean, we have over $700 million in actual realizable savings that we have accrued. 700 million. And let me start this off by saying, right, the 4 stars don't allow this to be just Stamatopoulos come up and put some numbers on a PowerPoint chart, you know, and omni-domni, you're good to go. No, I think you saw Admiral Gumbleton that was here earlier. He is one of the supporting commanders, and he's held accountable to make sure all of the gains, the realizable gains that we're reaping, are actually certified and actually happening out there. But it's more than just those direct savings. All in all, it's about $2.2 billion of what I call supply chain benefit. Now that doesn't necessarily mean those are all dollars that can be lifted and shifted and put to other priorities, but it certainly does mean that within our working capital funds, we can make better utilization, better investment decisions for both the current fight and for making the investments that we need in the future fight when it comes to spare parts. A lot of great things. There's a couple of stories that are here. One on the left-hand side is this $2.1 billion for our working capital fund. Our Navy working capital fund, again, is this big engine that really is a readiness provider for us. About 3 years ago when we started this journey out, we were in bad shape. The cash balances were on their way down towards $1.2 billion in the red. We were bleeding cash, we couldn't see ourselves. So unlike you all that may have a balance sheet, a profit and loss statement, a statement of assets and liabilities, a statement of cash flow, we don't have that in DoD, but we're working on it very hard to be able to get there. But all of you have that, and you can see yourselves clearly. We couldn't, but we started to do what we could to be able to recreate that information so we could see ourselves in a format. The other thing that we did, we made investments in some AI tools that also help us to be able to manage our cash-to-cash cycle times. So one of the things we learned, cash is king, especially during COVID. We weren't managing this like a business. We weren't paying attention to cash. So there's many, many, many good things that have come out here. Ultimately, you'll want to be able to see, just like in business, what are your inflows and what are your outflows? And we had lost sight of that over the course of time just because of our status quo way of doing business. We created a cash war room. We created a cash management office that really brings together acquisition decision making, forecasting capability, operational capability, in other words, and then also the financial engine and capability. And we've really made progress. As I said, it's about now today we're $1.2 billion in the positive, which makes our FMB and Admiral Gumbleton really happy about that. But as a result, we can now invest that money that we've created inside there through better business management and then start making the buys that we need in our working capital fund for more parts. But by the way, there's a second example. The second example is on the right-hand side. It's really about increasing the velocity of our supply chains. And so when we did our commercial benchmarking, we found out immediately that, gosh, our repair turnaround times, whether it was organic or whether it was commercial, were 5 times greater than commercial best-in-class standards. It was not uncommon to have our repair turnaround times that would be in excess of 360 days. How about if I told you 900 days, right? And so that was a problem, because a slow supply chain in terms of velocity is a bloated supply chain. And there's a lot of detrimental effects that can happen there. So if you don't have a supply chain that's operating effectively, which I would argue is efficiently, and moving material from the tactical edge all the way back to the defense industrial base and back out, you're going to have to buy more. And that's exactly what was happening. It was creating bad buying behavior. Okay? So our buyers were trying to support their customers, support their fleet. And because they didn't have a good source of repair turnaround times, our only alternative was to go buy another part. Okay? And things started to get better, or bigger, if you will, in our inventory. Again, I said the inventory is worth $40 billion right now, depending upon how you value it. But it's large, it's needed, and oh, by the way, we have to look at the shelf health of that inventory. Because when we go to World War VI, as I like to say, we're going to need a lot to be able to maintain our ships at sea and our aircraft flying, especially 8,000 miles away. So a lot of goodness has been coming out of that. The repair turnaround times, get this, the bottom line was through our industrial supply, and does shape the industrial base pillar with Admiral Morley, who I think will be here later tonight. We engage with all of you, the C-suite. We have honest, candid, open conversations. We expressed that we need our repair turnaround times decreased, and you answered the call. Thank you very much. And in the first round of the parts that we came out and asked you to improve your turnaround times, we got a 40% reduction. So it's been phenomenal what you all have done. I think we have one more slide and I can get off the stage here. The bottom line, end-to-end alignment of our supply chain's key, breaking down barriers, silos, having a single accountable supply chain integrator, and I thank the Navy for designating NAVSUP as that, and it's working well. Commercial best practices, we learn from you, and we go out and we get into your spaces too on occasion and learn what your challenge areas are. And then of course, it's that partnership that we have. So thank you everybody for what you're doing, and if you have any time for questions, I'll take them. If not,
we have time for one, sir.
Okay, one question. What do you got?
Admiral, this Al Schaefer. Just a quick question. This is nice for bringing down the repair time. Is anybody in the Navy looking at sub-tiers for things like microelectronics? Where right now, we don't know what we buy.
Yeah, that's great. So that's supply chain risk management. Absolutely. There are many in industry that are looking at that very closely, and we get some insight and we get demonstration on what's on some of the products that are out there, and they are impressive. And so we encourage that to be able to continue to be used and for help us to how to do that. But you would be surprised where you can take a single level of a product or something that you all make out there, and just using open source information, we can map 7 tiers worth of the sub-tier suppliers that are out there, and then using a variety of, if you will, formulas out there that exist, they can then pinpoint where there might be challenges, where there might be merger and acquisition activity that's going on, which may interest us depending upon who those buying companies are. So yeah, we need to do better at that, and that is something that we'll eventually get to. Yes, sir. Thanks very much. Anything else? All right.
Yes, sir.
Thanks.